Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Ukraine's operational shift deeper into Russia's rear infrastructure. This is increasingly a campaign designed around pressure, not just contact. Ukrainian leadership has signaled a move toward preemptive targeting of facilities that directly support Russia's war effort, and that framing matters because it broadens what counts as the battle space. What that looks like in practice is sustained strikes on energy systems, communications nodes, space-linked infrastructure, and logistics hubs that sit far away from the front lines. We're talking about gas processing complexes, satellite communications facilities, and industrial nodes tied into defense production and transport. These are not isolated hits. They are part of a layered effort to stretch Russian repair capacity, disrupt fuel flows, and force redistribution of air defenses away from the front. And the effect is starting to accumulate. Russia's energy system, in particular, is absorbing repeated shocks. Major refining capacity has been taken offline after repeated strikes, and some facilities feeding large population centers are now facing extended repair timelines measured in months rather than weeks. That matters because it turns what would normally be temporary disruption into something closer to structural constraint. Fuel isn't just a commodity here. It is mobility, logistics, and political stability all at once. You can already see the downstream pressure showing up in everyday life. Fuel availability is uneven across regions. Discussions inside Russian policy circles are increasingly focused on export controls and import options just to stabilize internal supply. For a major global energy exporter, that shift in conversation alone signals how much strain the system is under. Now zoom out from energy and look at the broader geography of pressure, because Crimea remains one of the clearest examples of what sustained infrastructure targeting does over time. Crimea is operating under a tightening set of constraints. Power systems have been intermittently restricted. Civilian services are being scaled back in response to grid stress. Transport and public operations are adjusting schedules to match energy availability. This is what distributed pressure looks like in practice. It doesn't break everything at once. It narrows capacity across multiple systems until administrators are constantly deciding what gets priority. And that has a second-order effect that's easy to miss. Military logistics become more fragile, not because they are directly destroyed, but because every supporting system they depend on becomes less predictable. Fuel, electricity, transport, communications, all of it starts to require more planning and carries more risk of disruption. Now shift north and west into Belarus, because this is where the war is increasingly brushing up against a gray zone escalation boundary. Belarus is becoming more deeply integrated into Russian operational support structures, particularly around long-range strike systems. Infrastructure on Belarusian territory is being used to extend the reach and effectiveness of drone operations into Ukrainian airspace. That includes communications relay functions and targeting support systems that make deeper strikes more feasible. But politically, this is still a balancing act for Minsk. Belarus is not fully committing combat forces, and leadership there continues trying to avoid crossing that threshold. At the same time, the dependence on Russia is real, especially economically and militarily. So what you end up with is a state that is structurally entangled in the war without fully owning the consequences of direct participation. And that creates a persistent escalation risk. Because from Ukraine's perspective, infrastructure that enables attacks can itself become a legitimate target set. From Russia's perspective, any strike on Belarusian-linked assets expands the conflict envelope. So Belarus sits in that uncomfortable space where it is not officially a battlefield, but it is increasingly treated like one in operational planning. Now, pull back into Russia internally, because this is where multiple stress lines are starting to converge. Fuel strain is one of the most visible indicators. Disruptions to refining capacity and logistics are not just theoretical economic issues anymore. They are showing up as uneven supply, localized shortages, and policy discussions about emergency measures. That includes export restrictions and attempts to rebalance domestic distribution. When a system like this starts talking about restricting exports to stabilize internal supply, it's a sign that production and distribution are no longer aligned smoothly. But it's not just energy. There is also growing friction in how the Russian state manages political stability under wartime conditions. Internal discussions around election timing and political sequencing reflect a broader anxiety about maintaining control under pressure from both external strikes and internal economic stress. These are not finalized decisions, but they signal that even routine political cycles are now being evaluated through a security lens. At the same time, internal security enforcement is tightening further. The legal system is processing a growing volume of cases tied to treason, espionage, and anti-state activity. Sentencing is severe, timelines are fast, and a large portion of cases are classified or anonymized. What stands out is not just the volume, but the normalization of the process. It is becoming bureaucratic, routine, and systematized in a way that reflects long-term internal security posture rather than short-term reaction. And underneath that, recruitment and manpower pressures are still present. The war continues to require sustained personnel inputs, and while the system is still functioning, it is doing so with increasing friction in certain regions and channels. Incentives are being adjusted, recruitment pathways are being expanded, and the state is adapting in real time to maintain force generation capacity. Now, on the battlefield itself, the situation remains active but structurally familiar. Across multiple sectors, Russian forces continue to apply pressure through infiltration tactics, small unit probing, and localized advances. These are not large, sweeping maneuvers. They are incremental pushes designed to test defensive seams and exploit gaps where they appear. It's a grinding approach rather than a breakthrough approach. Ukrainian forces are responding with layered defenses and frequent counterattacks, particularly where Russian units overextend or fail to consolidate. At the same time, Ukraine continues to rely heavily on long-range strike systems to shape the battlefield from a distance. That includes targeting logistics nodes, command elements, and staging areas that feed forward operations. The result is a battlefield that is highly active but strategically contained. Movement is happening, but it is slow, fragmented, and expensive for both sides. And while that tactical picture continues, the intelligence and information layer is running constantly in the background. Counterintelligence operations, sabotage concerns, and surveillance activity are now fully integrated into how both sides conduct the war. This is no longer a supporting function. It is part of the operational environment itself. On top of that, there are ongoing influence efforts aimed at shaping perception across European political systems. These are less about pushing a single narrative and more about increasing friction inside decision-making environments, creating disagreement, slowing consensus, and complicating alignment. Finally, at the alliance level, Europe is continuing to move toward deeper structural support for Ukraine. That includes longer-term financing discussions and more integrated defense production thinking. The trajectory here is towards sustainability rather than short-term supplementation, which is a significant shift in how support is being conceptualized. Thanks for listening. If this episode was useful, take a second to leave a review or drop a comment. It makes a real difference in getting this in front of the right audience. We also publish a daily intel brief on Substack at restrictedhandling.substack.com with deeper coverage on Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Have a great rest of your day.